Hello and welcome to this event on Brexit and Islamophobia. How are they connected? The event is organised by Another Europe is Possible. I'm Seema Syeda and I'm the Comms and Campaigns Officer at Another Europe, and I'll be chairing the panel discussion today. For those of you who don't know us, Another Europe is Possible was formed in 2016 as a left-wing pro-Remain organisation. Now we continue to fight for an internationalist politics of anti-racism, solidarity across borders, and freedom of movement for all. The issue of Islamophobia could not be more topical. Many of us were watching ex-cricketer Azeem Rafiq's moving testimony to Parliament yesterday. Azeem recalled being just 15 years old when he had red wine forced down his throat, being called the P word throughout his career, and the failure of his employers and colleagues to stand up for him or to take racism and Islamophobia that he faced seriously. But while Islamophobia is making the news headlines today, it has been around for centuries. From Orientalist tropes portraying Middle Easterners and people of color as the dangerous other, military attacks on Muslim majority countries abroad, to the prevent agenda and the portrayal of Muslims to be synonymous with terrorists at home, Islamophobia is a structural problem that pervades the state, the media, and wider society. The European Union is far from immune. A recent European court judgment allowed employers to ban women from wearing headscarves at work, trampling on their basic right to wear what they want to wear and to express their religious beliefs. Again, Islamophobia on the European continent is not a recent phenomenon, as the dark history of the Srebrenica and Balkan genocides of Bosnian Muslims shows. Racism and Islamophobia is a problem in itself, but it also underpins the rise of the far right, reactionary nationalism, and rising Euroscepticism. Nigel Farage's Breaking Point poster is a case in point, depicting hundreds of black and brown human beings at the border. It played on racial stereotypes and Orientalist tropes to create fear of the otherized migrant. Here at Another Europe, we want to launch a long-running campaign to tackle these dangerous beliefs. That's why we've put together a lineup of brilliant speakers and activists with lived experience of Islamophobia and a dedicated commitment to challenging it. We hope to use this event as a springboard for discussion at our national conference next month. The agenda for today is that I'll introduce each of the speakers and then we'll hear from them in turn for a total of half an hour. We'll then have about half an hour of questions and answers. So if any of you have any questions, please post them in the question and answer box, which you can access using the controls on the Zoom screen. You can post them as the speakers are speaking and we'll pick them up at the end. Then we will end with some closing remarks. Now I'll introduce our speakers. First up, we have Shaista Aziz. Shaista is a path-breaking journalist and anti-racist activist who recently won second place in the Hope Not Hate Hero Awards for her work with Amna, who I'll introduce later, on the Three Hijabis campaign to end racism in football. She's also a brilliant member of our national committee and has made strides forward in developing our Islamophobia campaign. Next up, we'll have editor of Left Foot Forward, Basit Mahmood. Basit previously worked as a reporter for Metro UK and Newsweek. Among the reasons he changed career to become a journalist was to combat Islamophobia after seeing the impact of inaccurate and sensationalist reporting on communities like his own in Luton and seeing how it empowered the far right. He has written extensively on Islamophobia in government and society. Thirdly, we'll have Amna Abdullatif. Amna is a community psychologist who has worked in the voluntary sector for over 15 years. Currently working at the Anne Frank Trust, a charity using education to challenge prejudice and discrimination with young people, Amna is the first visibly Muslim Arab woman to be represented at Manchester City Council after being elected in 2019 to represent Ardwick Ward. And last but not least, joining us from France, we have Yasser Louati. Yasser is a French human rights and civil liberties activist community organizer, and political analyst. He is a leading voice against racism and state authoritarianism in Europe and around the world. After years of grassroots activism and international campaigns out of the Southside banlieue of Paris, Yasser founded the CJL, a transnational human rights and civil liberties organization. Without further ado, we can move to our first speaker, Shaista Aziz.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum to the panel and also to everyone here. So I'm sorry I sort of just joined because I was in another Zoom meeting, but I think it's really important that this discussion is happening in this left space, particularly in the UK, because very tragically, Islamophobia is an issue that overwhelmingly is not being discussed anywhere, be it on the so-called left or the right of politics in this country. And it also continues to be denied as a issue. Islamophobia overwhelmingly is not seen as racism in this country, and that needs to urgently change. If we look at what's been going on in this country since yesterday, some of us watched Azim Rafiq, a former Yorkshire County cricket player, come to Parliament and talk in great detail about the level of Islamophobia and racism he faced, and as a result, the impact that it's had on his mental health, on his physical health. As a practicing Muslim man, he's disclosed that he was almost driven to taking his own life. I think this is an incredibly brave and powerful thing for anyone to talk about, let alone a practicing Muslim man. A lot of the media coverage, subsequent media coverage, has focused a lot on racism, but not on Islamophobia. And this as well really goes to the heart of how Islamophobia is consistently denied as a race issue in this country. And even now, despite the fact that Azim Rafiq is finally being listened to by people in power, they had no option, he forced them to listen to him. But the issue of Islamophobia is not coming into the equation. And I start there because this is Islamophobia Awareness Month, and I'm really honoured to be part of another Europe is Possible national committee. And I do want to thank you, Seema, for driving this work. You're saying I'm driving it. It's actually you who's driving it along with our colleagues, because quite frankly, I'm really very bored of being in so-called left spaces in this country and being subjected to casual Islamophobia, casual racism, and tropes about what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be a hijabi woman, because obviously if you wear a hijab, you can only be a hijabi woman, you can't be anything beyond that. And I think that on the left, there's a lot of individuals and organizations that are really good at lecturing others and pointing to the so-called, I'm saying so-called because honestly, as someone who believes in human rights for everyone, I sometimes cannot see any difference in racism and Islamophobia in the so-called left and the so-called right spaces. And there might be people here who find that really difficult and problematic to deal with, but this is a lived experience I face. I frequently show up in political spaces, and I do not see myself represented. I do not see an understanding of what it means to be Muslim or what it means to be British in this country. And I think that what we see is what we've seen and what we continue to see, especially in the last 20 years, because this year marks the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on New York and the subsequent horrific deaths of people being killed by drone strikes, by being killed by some of the most sophisticated weaponry in the world. Overwhelmingly, those people have been brown, racialized people, Muslim people in countries far, far away. But those countries aren't far away. Those countries are very much part of many of our heritage and many of our DNAs, but also part of the rich history of this country and how this country gained its wealth, and the history of this country that continues to be denied through the government's manufactured culture wars. So I think there's a lot to unpack around Islamophobia, but I think one of the main things is, why is it that in 2021 so many people still have never met a Muslim in their life. I mean, I find this really incredible. A bit like Basit, and I know Yasser, you're also involved in the media. I started working as a journalist from a very young age, in my early 20s, and I can tell you categorically that the level of racialized harm I was subjected to in newsrooms, the gendered Islamophobia, the Islamophobia, especially after 9/11, after 7/7, and the fact that I had to internalize all of it, and the amount of damage that I did to myself, to my mental health, to my physical health. I'm coughing, by the way, because I have long COVID, and I've been told by friends in the medical profession that long COVID disproportionately, as we know, COVID is disproportionately impacting people of color, particularly those of us from South Asian heritage backgrounds, but also it's disproportionately impacting people who are carrying a lot of trauma. And, you know, I can tell you very categorically and clearly that now I look back as I'm older and I can articulate myself in this way, and I started to piece together and understand what's been going on over these years, is the amount of damage that I did to myself because I wasn't able to talk about the blatant racism, the blatant Islamophobia, the othering, which was going on in the newsrooms I was working in, but also going on outside in the real world as I was going to work, coming from work, you know, brothers, cousins, uncles, you know, my dad, late dad, you know, being profiled. You know, these were all the news stories that I was being asked to produce, which overwhelmingly was not, you know, most of my colleagues, my white middle class colleagues, were not understanding that those images and those stories I was being asked to produce were actually, I had close proximity to those stories because those people are from my communities, and in fact those people are British, right? So they should be part of all our communities. But I'm going to wrap up by saying that even to this day and age, it is quite incredible for me to walk into a newsroom or to walk into a situation and meet someone else who's visibly Muslim. Okay, it doesn't happen very often. For, you know, it's quite rare to be given media space, to be given a platform as a person who happens to be a woman of color and a visible Muslim woman wearing a hijab. It doesn't happen all the time. And because of that, what happens is when we show up to stand up for ourselves, and indeed everyone, and I'm sure Amna will talk about this as well, the level of hate that we're subjected to is really off the scale. So this summer, alongside Amna and our sister Huda, we happen to be 3 British Muslim women who wear hijab, we launched the Three Hijabis campaign. This was on the back of the England Euro defeat, where 3 of our young black footballers were subjected to grotesque levels of racism because, well, allegedly it was because they missed a penalty. Obviously it wasn't, it was about racism. And we launched a viral petition. We got 1.2 million plus signatories. After 48 hours of this petition being launched, we were calling for the government, the Football Association and tech companies to work together to ban racists from football. Boris Johnson, a man not known for his anti-racism credentials, stood up in Parliament and said that he was committed to making the change that 1.2 million plus people were calling for. What we found really interesting in our journey of launching this campaign, which is far from over because the work still needs to be done, is the amount of people, i.e. white male journalists in particular, who were really shocked that women who look like us are into football, for a start, you know, that we were passionate and committed about standing up for black men. And it's like, well, here's, you know, newsflash, folks, we believe in everyone's humanity and we stand up for everyone's humanity. It has to be said, though, it doesn't, I don't think it works necessarily in the same way for Muslims. I have been observing the silent, deafening silences around particularly Azim Rafiq's case for a long time, but I think it's very, very revealing to see that so-called mainstream anti-racism movements overwhelmingly have stayed away from this. And I believe it's because of Islamophobia, and I believe they just either are not interested or are not willing to become uncomfortable themselves and interrogate their own bigotry towards Muslims and their own lack of understanding. And wherever I've worked, and I've worked in some of the most high-profile organizations, okay, I've had to leave every single place of work I've ever worked in because of racism, because of Islamophobia, because of gendered Islamophobia, because of racialized bullying, because of sexual harassment, because of fetishization of Muslim women in hijabs. We are either we are hyper visible, and we are hyper erased. And this is something that a lot of Muslim women face every single day in this country. And by the way, I'd also like to say very clearly, we face 360 degrees of this, allegedly from our own so-called community, our own so-called men, our own so-called women, and everyone else. I think this is really important for us to also unpick this in relation to Islamophobia, because we have to be striving to change what's going on, and that only happens by being honest and by, you know, really digging deep and having these uncomfortable conversations. So I'm going to stop there because I know everybody else needs to talk, and this is a really broad subject. But I just want to say again that I'm really proud of the fact that we're holding this first discussion. We cannot cover everything around Islamophobia in this one meeting, and I do hope that Another Europe is Possible is going to now start building the solidarity, particularly with European Muslims. You know, Yasser, you're someone I know, I have a lot of respect for the work you do, really keen to hear from you, but this has to be the start of a conversation and action-based conversation to tackle Islamophobia. Thank you. And thanks to all the panel for their amazing work as well.
Thank you, Shaista, for raising the importance of the problems of representation, as well as the reality of the violence that so many Muslims face, whether that's literal violence in terms of military attacks, but also the violence towards our mental health and towards forcing us to be excluded from spaces. The next speaker is Basit Mahmood. Basit, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Seema, for organising this. I mean, Shaista earlier on to this Islamophobia Awareness Month. Well, unfortunately, I openly say this in my industry, it's a shame that there's a bigotry blind spot when it comes to Islamophobia. It's not really, you know, you wouldn't know it's Islamophobia Month apart from a handful of few MPs and a few journalists repeatedly kind of talking about Islamophobia Awareness Month. It doesn't really receive the same kind of you know, prominent media attention as other important months. Now, I'll just quickly say, I mean, the link initially when I received this was about Brexit and Islamophobia. I mean, look, I live in Luton, a vote leave town, and I've met people on the left, for example, who voted Brexit, people on the left who are probably more anti-Islamophobia than some of the Remain people I've met in my life. And you know, it's not coincidence that people like Michael Fabricant, hardcore Brexiteer, shared a picture of Sadiq Khan, you know, with a balloon on a pig. It's not a coincidence. And indeed, Dariz, another hardcore Brexiteer, retweets Tommy Robinson. So I think the links between Brexit and Islamophobia are pretty clear. This xenophobia, populist xenophobia, that they push this kind of imperial nostalgia, and certainly Muslims aren't part of that global all-white Britain that some of these people envisage. But I'll just quickly go into the media and when it comes to Islamophobia, because the sad thing is, look, I had no interest, unlike Shaista, I don't know what her background was before journalism, but I had no interest in becoming a journalist. I didn't even know that you could get paid for writing for newspapers. When I told my parents I wanted to be a journalist, they were like, no one reads the papers, you're not going to make much money, but nobody ever goes into it for the money, I don't think. But the sad thing was, we got to a stage where I was about 23, 24, I'd left university, and there was an article in the Sun that said 1 in 5 Muslims support ISIS. Now, I only spotted it because I was on the tube to work and this man was reading it. And I've got 6 people in my family, so I thought, well, basically what you're saying is one of us supports ISIS. That's the way I don't see it as a stat or as an abstract thing. Me, my dad, or my 4 sisters, or someone supports ISIS in our household, which couldn't be true. And then they apologized on page 23 or whatever in a small box. Who's going to read that? I mean, the front page had a picture of Jihadi John when they announced 1 in 5 Muslims support ISIS. And I thought, you know, living in Luton, putting up with constant Tommy Robinson marches, Britain First marches. You know, we hear about this idea around no-go zones, but no one ever thought, you know, these young Muslim girls and boys, their hometowns have become no-go zones because of the far right doing a demonstration every other bloody weekend, where we were made very aware from a young age, around about 14, 15, I was only around 15, 16 when the EDL kicked off, that our identities were seen as problematic, that we were seen as a threat. So I decided, right, enough's enough. I literally walked into my office and quit and became a journalist. you know, I started off very quickly. I was in local London, and local papers are good, but then I ended up at a national news desk, and as Shaista was saying, I was the only permanent non-white member of staff on the news desk in central London. But it was quite interesting seeing it firsthand, because there I was before kind of talking about Islamophobia. And one thing I really want to reiterate, I would never ever demand special treatment. Islamophobia is not asking for special treatment for anyone. By all means, you know, you get good Muslims, you get Muslims who do, you know, find themselves on the wrong side of the law. We're as complex and complicated as anybody else. But the frustrating thing was that all of a sudden, you know, people think we're demanding special treatment and we're too sensitive. Not really. We're asking for equal treatment, not special treatment. And I said that to an editor once in a newsroom. I've never asked for special treatment. And it's really important that people remember that. No one's asking you to not criticize a particular ideology, just asking you to be equal, not make things appear as though there's specifically a problem to Islam and Muslims. You know, let's talk about the white grooming gangs in Derby as well, for example. You know, let's not just make it a Muslim problem. So then I was in these newsrooms, and, you know, I realized that Malcolm X said the media is the most powerful weapon on earth, and they can make the oppressed look like the oppressor. And I realized what that meant, because here you were in these newsrooms where the overarching priority for a lot of them was, how do we get clicks? How do we get traffic? That's all that matters. And, you know, sticking the word Muslim in front of a headline will guarantee you certain clicks. And that's what I saw, and I found it quite shocking, you know. And Shaista was talking earlier on about not seeing yourself represented. I was told specifically that the only reason the Muslim Council of Britain were kicking off of Islamophobia was because of what was happening in the Labour Party and anti-Semitism. Not that, you know, never mind the fact that there were Conservative MPs and councillors, by the way, who retweeted Tom Robinson, said Muslims should be thrown off bridges, sterilised. When it comes to the media reporting, that was not reported by the Daily Mail or the Telegraph. You know, barely anyone reported that. Muslim Council of Britain submitted a report saying here's hundreds of instances of Islamophobia. It wasn't reported. So those are the things that frustrated me. And one of the things that I found frustrating is the middle-class white view is seen as universal in the media. You know, that's seen as I was told when I wrote about Islamophobia that I had an agenda as a Muslim journalist. You know, the white journalist never has an agenda. No one says to a white journalist, you're brilliant at writing about white issues, but all of a sudden I've got a Muslim agenda if I write a few stories about Islamophobia. It's something I never really understood. So that was the kind of dynamic I was operating against. And the frustrating thing is, I mean, most of my profession has failed miserably when it comes to, if our job is to hold power to account, then, you know, 2 years ago, the Conservative Party promised a definition on Islamophobia. We've had nothing. 2 years ago, the EHRC was asked to investigate the Conservative Party. We've had nothing. And this hierarchy of racism got to stop. We've got to condemn all forms of bigotry and racism. And just quickly, I'll just come on to left spaces as well. I mean, the frustrating thing is, look, I'm a member of the Labour Party. 1 in 3 British Muslims, I think, called a Labour Muslim Network report, had experienced Islamophobia. I've had friends, members of the Labour Party, tell me that, look, they've experienced Islamophobia in Labour Party spaces. And there's this idea amongst leftists that, oh, I can't really be and this is really frustrating. This is the big argument that really annoys me. I can't be a racist because Islam's not a race. I've heard that from people who see themselves as progressives. Well, Muslims are racialized, overwhelmingly black and brown from the global south, and they can't really explain why Sikhs get attacked for being Muslim if it's not about a race. You know, they're racialized. And the other thing that frustrates me, there's this idea on the left that, I don't like the idea of religion. You know, I'm a universal, I'm agnostic, I'm atheist. No one's asking you to convert to Islam. No one's asking you to believe in the tenets of the faith. All we're simply saying is treat us with equality and dignity. And you can't, and I think, you know, across Europe, you've seen with what's happening in Hungary, Switzerland, France. In France, a Muslim woman, I'm sure Yasser will touch on this later on, but a Muslim woman was dropped by the centrist Macron simply for wearing a headscarf from an election. And it beggars belief that basically this is what's happening in modern 21st century Europe. And a lot of people who I see as people on the left have stayed completely silent because they think to defend Muslims is to defend the idea of religion. And all the while we're being attacked from the far right, and you cannot defeat the far right. There's a study that showed that Islamophobia has replaced immigration as the main driver behind the far right. You cannot defeat the far right unless you tackle Islamophobia. You just can't. And I think I just want to say that please do recognize that, you know, Muslims aren't asking for special treatment. And one of the most frustrating things I've seen, whether it's the Prevent scheme, and, you know, this all has an impact on the mental health of young British Muslims, or people who are perceived to be Muslims, and Sikhs experience Islamophobia as well. And that's something that's really underreported. You know, there's an entire community here where I live of children as young as 6 or 7 coming up to me saying, I don't want to go into cricket or football. I don't want to participate. So we've got this catch-22 situation where we're constantly lambasting Muslims for not integrating, but at the same time doing everything we can to make it absolutely difficult for them to integrate. Whether, you know, Shaista said she'd quit every single job because of racism and Islamophobia, and that breaks my heart. And that's something that, you know, so much talent and potential in our country is being lost because of this hatred and bigotry that so many people have normalized and refused to speak out against.
Thank you, Basit. And I think that point about, you know, we're not asking you to have an opinion about religion or to convert to any religion. It's just about treating us with equal respect is so important and so key when it comes to this, this issue and many misconceptions about it. So thanks for that, Basit. Moving on now, we have Amna, who will enlighten us a bit more about the Three Hijabis campaign and other anti-Islamophobia campaigns she's been involved with.
Thanks so much, Seema, for organising this, and it's great to be here and hear from everyone. I guess as somebody who was actually born in the UK but lived all my early childhood up until the age of 8, actually in Libya in North Africa, and I remember when I first came to the UK at the age of 8, and everyone was going on about how, you know, lucky we were that we were going to be coming to the UK, and what a difference it was going to make. And I never recognized just how powerfully negative the experience of being a Muslim child coming into this country without speaking English would be on my life and the life of, you know, my family and so on. And unfortunately, having lived in London for that period of time up until the age of 16, where we had the National Front literally in the same estate that we lived in, people who, you know, had gone to the same primary school we did, who used to come to our house, eat with us, who used to socialize, who used to, you know, we used to rent films and come and relax in our house on a Friday night after school, because many of them came from very difficult backgrounds. And, you know, my mum was the kind of the homemaker in many ways, and loved to make sure that we had that space that was safe for us to come together with our friends. And suddenly these same young people who we'd spent so much time with suddenly shifted drastically when we went into high school. And those same people then became the instigators of so much hate against my family and other families of Muslims in that same estate that we lived in Northwest London. And I remember those times because it wasn't, you know, I think lots of people think, I think Brexit has kind of just mobilized the far right in a very different way, and it's become much more in your face. But none of this is actually new. You know, when I think back to the 90s, of which, you know, that period of my teenage years, and think of just the grotesque number of deaths, attacks on young Muslims particularly, but also, you know, people from the Black community who were targeted by the National Front and other fascist groups in this country. It was our daily experience. This was not, you know, this isn't anything new. This is what we all grew up with. And I think it's important to note that, you know, none of this is new. And I think, you know, Shaista, I think, mentioned this at the beginning, you know, that we are not experiencing something outside of the norm of what we have had to grow up with as British Muslims in the UK. And I'm lucky in many ways because actually I had citizenship. You know, my mum's English. You know, I have white members of my family in this country. There are lots of privileges that I've had, and still the amount of Islamophobic hate that I've experienced over my life since being in the UK has been immense. And it's unfortunate that, you know, I have 2 young daughters now, both of whom are also visibly Muslim, and some of their experiences are very similar. And it saddens me that, you know, that I've had to go through that experience, but actually, you know, my children are also going through the same thing. And, you know, I remember one of the comments one of them made after the Manchester Arena attack, which is literally down the road from where we live. When that happened, one of them said to me, "I now know why they really hate us as Muslims." And I thought, God, you know, what do we need to do to make sure that our children, our young people, you know, young Muslims in this country don't internalize so much of that Islamophobia that we've had to internalize? And unfortunately, many of them already have. And so we really do need to start tackling actually how we deal with this issue. I think, you know, for me, it's always surprised me, and you know, Shaista was talking about, you know, this kind of, you know, we're really hyper visible. Everyone wants to tell us their bloody opinion about Muslims, right? Because we are almost seen as the, you know, the kind of the vision of what Muslims are. You know, that our visibility is perceived in that way, and so you get Muslims telling us how we should be as Muslim women, but then you get all of these random people who are not from from our community, from white communities, wanting to share with us what their attitudes, opinions, views are about our hijab, our choices, our faith, and so on. And so you know, that kind of visibility is really hyper, and at the same time, everyone wants to silence us. Everyone wants us to be quiet, to disappear, to not exist, to really not be out in the, you know, in public life, which is quite unfortunate, since myself and Shaista are both elected councillors in this country, and so we already exist in that public life. But how difficult that space is to maintain. And there are many conversations that I've had with Shaista over the last 2 years of just being in elected post about just stepping down, just stepping away, just move, you know, that it's not, is it worth it? You know, do we really need to do this? And I think this is, you know, this is how it often feels like, that actually we get put into these spaces and we want to be in these spaces, but they're not easy for us to be in, and it's not made easy. And there are lots of people that want to erase us from the narrative. And I think what we saw with the Three Hijabis campaign was a real interest. You know, there was so much surprise at the fact that myself and Shaista and Huda could speak well and could be out in, you know, the media, and, you know, enjoyed football and other activities that, you know, we weren't speaking about Islam or Muslims or Muslim women, that we were talking about, you know, something else that we really, you know, were passionate about, and wanted to really tackle the issues around racism in the sport, and actually how, you know, our own relationship with football and what it means. And you know, and then, you know, that surprise, some of it was very positive, and unfortunately much of it was really positive, and we had a lot of support, but unfortunately we also got a lot of negativity and lots of people who just wanted to essentially just shut it down, because the moment they knew that it was led by 3 hijabi Muslim women, that it was no longer a viable, you know, or an important issue for to be tackled. And it does raise many questions about why that is. And I think it, you know, it very much links to, you know, the rampant Islamophobia that has been so normalized in this country. And I think one of the things that is always really, that I always think is incredibly important, is about that it's everyone's problem, it's everyone's issue to tackle this, to tackle Islamophobia and other forms of racism. I don't think being a good person, and I hear this a lot from the left, that we are just good people. You know, we don't care about these things. We don't, you know, we don't see these as being problems, but actually they perpetrate a lot of that harm. And I know that I've experienced a lot of that harm within left spaces since, you know, I joined politics, and I know many Muslims have also. And I think we need to just see this, that actually all of us have a responsibility, and the good people type tropes that we sometimes hear are really not good enough. You know, lots of people are good people, but unless you're acting and changing things, it really means very little. And I think what Azim Rafiq's you know, story, really harrowing, and you know, I didn't think that I would get so triggered by his testimony, and I listened to some of it yesterday night, and it's just so harrowing to just hear actually what he went through, and actually the connections of what his experiences were with so many of my own experiences and the experiences of so many Muslims in this country, in our workplaces. And I think all of us have to ask really important questions about what is happening in our workplaces, who's actually there, who isn't, and why is it that, I think, lots of spaces, often people of colour and particularly women often leave workspaces, not because they want to, but because actually they just want to protect their own mental health, and decide that for the best thing to do is to actually leave those spaces. And I know that's, a decision that I've taken a number of times in my workplace, because it's just not worth it anymore. And there's no one there to protect you as a Muslim woman, unfortunately. There really isn't. And so, yeah, I just think, that institutional elements really need to be reflected on. And I think that's an important message for everyone that's here listening today, and listening to this recording, to really reflect on. And whatever power that you have, and I think we all have some power at different levels, but we all have some power. We need to be utilising it to ensure that we are tackling this issue head on, and not pretending that somehow everything is fine, because the likely chances are it isn't for many Muslims in your workplaces. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amna, especially raising this issue of internalized Islamophobia, as well as your experience on, growing up on council estates and the class element of this issue. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten, which is that my cousins in the 90s, their house on a council estate was firebombed by another member of the estate. And my 5-year-old cousin was close to the letterbox and, almost died because of that. And they had to move from Leicester to Manchester. And this is how Muslims on the daily are just excluded from spaces and have to move because they are rendered unsafe, but also how class impacts that. And this is something we really need to start to unpick. So thank you for that. Last but not least, we move on to Yasser Louati, who's joining us from France. Yasser has a lot of interesting things to say about what's going on in France, and really looking forward to hear you speak. Thank you, Yasser.
Thank you very much, Seema, and thank you all for your precious input, especially to give me some kind of insight and updates over what's happening, what has been happening in the UK. So France has been making headlines now for years when it comes to its relationship with Muslims. Shaista has covered it quite extensively for many years. And oftentimes people keep asking, what is France's problem with its Muslim population? Well, it's no different than what's happening in the UK, other than that the historical dynamics are a bit different. Of course, we don't have time to go all the way back to Orientalism and the colonial period, etc. But what we can speak of is the legacy of colonial policies, Orientalism in France's, day-to-day dealing with Muslims. And I will take one example. This example is when the Council of Europe shared a campaign about the normality, between quotation marks, of the headscarf, launched by a Muslim organization called Femiso. There was no problem at the level of the European Council, but who came out of nowhere to take down the campaign and ban it in France, and even launch a counter campaign? France. And of course, people were halfway surprised, because as France was banning this campaign, it reminded the rest of the world the hysteria around the Muslim headscarf that symbolizes everything that is wrong with France. So much so that anytime France has a problem, you will see the Muslim headscarf, being covered by the media. What I call Islamodiversion, what I have been calling this for years. You have unemployment problems, bring in the headscarf. You have security problems, bring in the headscarf. A problem with, government corruption, a Muslim lady wore the burkini, etc., etc. This, in turn, shows how France has been unable to accept Muslims as part of the national fabric, or they can be part of the national fabric under one condition: that they stop being Muslim. They can eat couscous, they can wear an Oriental garment, whatever, but they cannot exist as Muslims in the public space, let alone express as Muslims, or, dare I say, challenge the status quo. Now, many people would say, well, that's old school racism, and unfortunately, we cannot get rid of it. That's not really true. Of course, you have the rampant racism that is shared by the general population, the fear of the other, and the rivalries between communities, etc. But in the case of France, and the reason why I call it the Laboratory of Islamophobia, is that France has been the first European country that directly legislated against Muslims. Banning of the headscarf in 2004, banning of Muslim mothers from attending school outings in 2014, banning of the burkini, now the anti-separatism law, banning of the full face veil, even though domestic intelligence counted the number of women wearing it and estimated the number to be 464. Which means out of a population of 60 million people, 464 women decided to wear a full face veil, and that was sufficient to launch a national campaign and call for a new law because France was under threat. Now, many would question how come these controversies keep happening over and over again, and how come there is no resistance to them? Well, because Islamophobia in France has brought together the whole political spectrum in France, of course, with a few exceptions. But if you take declarations from Lutte Ouvrière, the Trotskyite political party, with Florence Artaud, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, if you take Olivier Faure from the Socialist Party, Fabien Roussel from the Communist Party, all the way to the right and the far right with Marine Le Pen and Zemmour, we see that they may disagree on socio-economic issues. They may disagree on the European Union, but when it comes to Muslims, they always agree that there is a problem with Muslims. Some will frame it in terms of a security threat. Some will frame it in terms of identity threat, or the combination of both. Many people abroad, when they take a look at France, they bring back, which is actually correct, the hoax called the theory of the Great Replacement, theorized by Renaud Camus. Actually, not really, because people before him brought it in, like Gobineau in the 19th century. There has always been a paranoia in France about the purity of blood. That's not something new, but Renaud Camus brought it to the limelight again and said, well, the ongoing mass immigration coming from African and the Caribbean and the Asian nations has launched a process of replacing the white majority population, hence the Great Replacement. So people, when the Christchurch terrorist attack took place, they found out that one of the terrorists had actually quoted Renaud Camus, and it was actually not a coincidence that he had matured his attack in France. Why not somewhere else? Why not in Sweden? Why not in, I don't know, like in the north? No, it had to take place in France. But the problem is that people have this one-sided view of the equation. Why? Because the theory of the Great Replacement in France might be the monopoly of the right and the far right, but it also has a left-leaning counterpart. The exact same theory has been framed by a person called, excuse me, Laurent Bouvet, a leftist from close to the Socialist Party, now close to the Emmanuel Macron party, seen as a forward thinker when it comes to laïcité. And to him, he coined a theory called cultural insecurity. So whether on one hand you have the Great Replacement theory, on the other you have cultural insecurity, but both theories express this anxiety to see the normalized position of Muslims in French society. Excuse me. With these two theories having become mainstream, one of them having led directly to terrorist attacks in Christchurch, New Zealand, this raises the question over who has adopted both of these theories. And the answer is all political parties, unfortunately. There has been no resistance, not from the traditional conservatives, what you would call the Gaullists, the people who follow the legacy of Charles de Gaulle, a racist and a war criminal, by the way, and no resistance coming from the left. How so? If you take a look at the structures of political parties in France, you will see that yes, they will always tell you, we welcome diversity. They will have some blacks, some Arabs, some Muslim women, but they will always be at the position of either, sticking, billboards on the street, shouting in the street in terms of rallies, but they are never part of these strategic circles. They are never there to decide along with the head of the political party, which means that they are only there to abide by the status quo and to never challenge it. They always have to behave as guests in those political parties. And if they make it to a position of being elected, they know damn well they can't open their mouths on the issues of race, on the issues of police brutality, and let alone on the issues of Islamophobia, because should they do that, they would lose their seats and they would be singled out. Now, those are the political parties. How about the other leverage of power, the media? I heard Basit and Shaista speak of the media, and honestly, for the past 4 or 5 years, I have been trying to raise awareness over the nefarious role of left-leaning media outlets. We know conservative outlets, they feed Islamophobia, they look for clickbait by demonizing Muslims. We know the enemy, we know how they operate, and we know how their ideology. But what does not help, on the other hand, is that so-called progressive news outlets are still portraying the reality. They are still reporting on events by looking at reality through the deforming lens of white supremacy. For example, the hierarchy of news is always decided by white people. The angle of an article, the final say comes to a white person. If you take a look at how those news outlets operate, or how the newsrooms are structured, and the hierarchy, being designed over there, you will not see people from black and brown or Muslim backgrounds who can actually add some diversity of opinion and challenge what people perceive as normal. Yeah, your normal is not my normal. So maybe I should have a say in reporting over a story. I will tell you a story that happened to me in New York. I went there and I met with a friend working for a major, progressive news outlet. And for years, I have been telling him, how come they don't cover these issues of police brutality, racism? And when they do, it's always kind of, mushy. And he's kind of embarrassed, but at the end of the day, he says, listen, Yasser, at the end of the day, it's a white news outlet. Yeah, but I'm like, there's 10 South Asians, 20 African Americans, how many Arabs? Yeah, but we are only journalists. The editorial board is strictly white. So at the end of the day, we might make a report, we might make an investigation, but they decide what gets printed and what gets put on the front page. And when I asked him, I'm like, can't you make some push to kind of diversify the editorial board? He was like, good luck with that. So I brought these two issues today because this campaign that you guys are now launching, I heard oftentimes the word conversation and narrative. That's extremely important. But we have to keep in mind that it's also about the fundamental change that needs to be brought to political parties. It's not sufficient to say, you guys do not cover the issues that are, important to us. It's not sufficient to call out and say, oh, well, please mention Islamophobia in your next speech. I no longer believe in morality or, how can I say, principles when it comes to politics. Unless anti-racism and internationalism are cornerstones of your political project, it's gonna, fade. Why? Because the day will come, you will have to negotiate. And what people do when their interests clash with their principles, interests always win. In that case, if it's not part of the core of the project, it's going to be very difficult to not only change the narrative, but also to make sure that this narrative translates into real life legislation, real life changes. Look at what has Keith Seymour done to the Labour Party right after, with the risk of shocking many, right after the lack of strong leadership by Jeremy Corbyn. That was a disaster, and I've been following it from France in complete dismay. There was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take over the Labour Party and then transform that momentum and grassroots activism into real-life political project, and it's all now down to shambles. Now, how much time do I have left? How's my time?
I think we need to wrap up very soon.
All right, I'll take just 2 more minutes. Okay, now, I spoke of the political parties and I spoke of the media, but also now the responsibility of the general population. I say today what I said some years ago back in London when I was invited by the NUS. Well, back then it was headed by Malia Bouattia, that I salute, by the way. Muslims are not taking your jobs. Muslims are not dropping your wages. Muslims are not, destroying the environment. Muslims are not MPs who have second jobs making them millionaires. So if you have some anger, take your anger on your own elected officials in the House of Tories, in the House of in Parliament. What really made no sense to me with Brexit, and of course we can criticize the European, and I do it day in, day out, and I can do it all day, is that people turned against the European Union by blaming their neighbors who were doing the job they refused to do. And once Brexit became a reality, they complained about it. Now I ask people, if you truly worry about the future of your kids, do you honestly think they're going to have a bright future by calling for civil war and continuous conflict in your own country? It makes no sense. So as politicians get elected with this fear mongering, you're acting like fools and making them win election after election instead of holding them accountable for the disastrous policies of the past 10, 15 years, but also for lying to you with this Brexit campaign with the results that we know. Thank you for listening, and I will be welcoming your questions anytime.
Thank you so much, Yasser. And at the risk of being cheesy, I noticed you have a Batman model behind you. So yeah. Thank you for your call to action, not just words, but deeds. And at this point, I think Shaista has to leave us for a BBC interview. I don't know if you want to say anything now or...
Yes, if that's okay, Seema. So first of all, Yasser, it's always great to hear you. It's really lovely to see you after so many years. So just very quickly, everyone, Yasser and I first met after the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris, and I was asked by the BBC to go make a documentary about what it means to be young French and Muslim. And as someone who is a journalist and prides myself in having a little bit of an idea of what's going on in the world, I have to say I was beyond horrified by listening intently to French Muslims about their daily realities. And there were many things that were just completely astounding, but wherever I was going, I kept being asked, where are you from? Which is not unique to us. We're constantly asked that, right? Where are you from? Where are you really from? And so I kept being asked this question. So I kind of, after like 10 times of being asked this question, I said to one of the French Muslim sisters who asked me, I said, can I just ask you? I said, if I was just walking up the road and I hadn't opened my mouth, you didn't hear me speak, can I not just look like I'm a French Muslim? And she said, and what she said will always stay with me. She said, oh no, she said, you don't look, we know you're not from here. And I said, okay, what is it about my appearance? She said, you walk with a lot of confidence. You have a very unapologetic vibe. And I was like, wow. And she said, that's how we know you're not from here. And that's why everyone keeps asking you, where are you from? She said, also the fact that you can wear your hijab with such confidence. So I wrote a piece for the New York Times a few years ago about Islamophobia. And that was my, the final point that I raised. And it had such a huge resonance with a lot of people. But I spent a lot of time traveling around. I met lots and lots of people. I also ended up in the French Parliament, and I'll end up on this point. I was asked to interview Marine Le Pen's niece, one of the youngest elected officials in France. Okay, so I went to do my interview, and obviously I knew this was going to happen, but I wasn't going to let it get in the way. So I walked into the French Parliament, and the receptionist was like, "You can't come in here." And she said, we were told a BBC journalist is showing up. I said, yeah, that's me. And she was like, well, you can't come in here. And I said, oh, why is that? And she said, you wear this thing. you can't come in. And I said, well, I said, I'm booked to do this interview. And I said, I'm from Britain, I'm British. And she was looking at me and she said, what? And I said to her, I'm as British as fish and chips. It's exactly what I said to her. And then she let me in to interview Marine Le Pen. Now, honestly, as I said to you, I have plenty of friends in France, but making that documentary was a really painful experience to hear the lived daily realities of French Muslims who are constantly being told, as Yasser says, you don't belong here, you will never belong here. And the huge hypocritical contradictions in the country around young French people. And I'm devastated to say I'm hearing the same type of framing and rhetoric here. It's been transported over here, and it hasn't taken long. And without a shadow of a doubt, Brexit has fueled and mainstreamed Islamophobia. There is, the words Muslim, terrorist, refugee, migrant are interchangeable in our daily political and public and media discourse. This is not happening by accident, right? And some of the rationale behind Brexit was very much that, those dirty Muslims are coming, they're coming, close the borders, close the borders. And, Yasser, a bit like what you're saying, the left and overwhelmingly in this country, frankly, is not equipped to deal with what it needs to deal with. And I urge everybody here to really question why that is. And like Basit has said continuously, and Amna said, we are not asking for special treatment. We are human beings and we belong here. We belong in Europe. We've always belonged in Europe. We've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're not going anywhere. Okay. So I would like to ask why the left is so ill-equipped and also reluctant in many ways to deal with these issues, which is about racism. And I'm going to stop there, but I will come back and just to say thank you again for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Shaista. So we have about 15, 20 minutes left for questions, and we've got lots of questions in the box. So what I'll do is I'll read out 3 questions and then I'll put it back to the panel for each of you to answer as you wish in order. So the first question is from Laura Parker. What, in practical terms, can we try to do about the space we have access to, the Labour Party and maybe Greens and Lib Dems and SNP as well? The second question from Lucy Nabiju. I'd really like to hear the panelists' thoughts on coverage of both the events in Liverpool and those on the Polish-Belarusian border. How much is Brexit just a symptom of wider far-right, authoritarian, racist developments across the whole European continent? And from an anonymous attendee, if fighting Islamophobia is a fight for racial justice, how can Muslims assert themselves politically as Muslims in the public sphere? We're heavily securitized already, there's no barrier for entry, and there are lots of internal divisions that might stand in the way of that. Okay, so Amna, if you'd like to respond to any of those questions, please do go ahead.
Well, I'll leave the media one to Yasser and Basit to answer. In terms of the other 2 questions about kind of how we utilize the power that we have in the spaces that we have, I think one of the things that I really found astounding in the Labour Party and politics in general is that people really don't listen. They don't listen to when I've said that this is Islamophobic, this is racist, this is wrong, let's not approach this way, let's not do it that way. Can we please address, what we are saying here, because it's not appropriate, that people just don't listen. And I think, if we actually spent some more time listening to people of colour who exist in those spaces, who are really struggling, and you might not think that they're struggling, but trust me, we are struggling in these spaces to get heard. Is really about listening. And I think when they're saying, and I've unfortunately had to support friends who have had to complain in the party about racist, abusive behaviours and bullying, and people just shut down. People are scared to to speak out, to offer solidarity, to offer support, because they don't want to be marred by the fact that actually often those people that do speak out and do challenge are shut down. They're shut down in the party, that they're refused positions within the party. They're told that they need to quieten down, to do as they're told, not to rock the boat too much, particularly if you're a Muslim, just do as you're told and you'll be fine. And we'll vote for you to have this position, and we'll support you to do this, and so on. And actually, the whole party needs rocking. I'm sorry that you can't just sit and just accept these kinds of behaviors happening, whether they're happening to you, whether they're happening to other people. It is not okay. And that's how you end up in the same situation that Azim Rafiq and many others, where institutions allow racism, allow Islamophobia and other forms of discrimination to just become the norm, because we do not want to challenge, we do not want to rock the boat. And I can't tell you how exhausting it is to be in spaces where you're constantly asking questions, you're constantly trying to support people who are trying to just speak up about instances of racism that they've experienced and so on, and there is a deathly silence. So what I would say is, honestly, support people, speak up on these issues, speak up for others. Don't allow the normalization of all of this stuff to happen in the spaces that you have. Ask questions. One of the first things that I started to see when I became a councillor was I represent a ward that is about 70% BAME. Massive ethnic minority community in my ward, and yet every space where there is an ounce of power, there is not one person of colour in that space. You tell me why. Nobody's questioned it. All these years of elected people in this ward, nobody's ever questioned it. Nobody's ever thought, well, where is the 70% of people that should be in these spaces making decisions about actually what is going on in their lives, about housing, about the environment, about the spaces that they occupy, about their work and so on. Nobody questioned it. And I think, asking questions, and lots of people have said, oh, were you trying to say that we're racist? I'm like, God's sake, the sensitivity of some people. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just saying that there is a problem here because there's something that's not quite right and it's missing, and let's do something about it. But these are the things that I think, that we just need to be doing more of. And in terms of, the infighting, the internal divisions, and they exist within, kind of BAME members of the Labour Party. And there is a definite kind of division between kind of members of the Labour Party who have been there for a long time and have existed and survived and thrived sometimes in a system where you do as you're told and you're fine, and that's what they've existed in, and they've not challenged that. And good for them if that's worked for them at that point in time. But I think you are seeing a new generation of people who are just not prepared to just do as they're told. And I think that's where you get that kind of clash of people who just, I'm not prepared to pretend that somehow my identity should limit what I have access to and what I can do. And so that is where I think you're seeing some of that friction, and there has to be a way that we move beyond it. But I do think that we just need to actually just support each other a little bit better in terms of Muslims within whatever political party you happen to be in. And there are many Muslims in the Labour Party, and I am very proud to be, part of the Labour movement on the issues, the core values and the core issues that it represents. It's unfortunate that that's not the reality sometimes internally, but that's not going to deter what we need to be doing and how we should be working together. So I think that's, for me, that I'm sorry if that maybe doesn't answer the questions very well, but I think there is just so much going on at the moment. And when you go into the internal politics of parties, and I'm sure this is the same for any political party, it becomes such a messy space to be in. But I think one of the things that I've said over and over again is that I'm not willing to change, why I came into politics and how I exist in that space, and making sure that, we allow other people to come into that space too, You know, I'm the only visible Muslim woman in Manchester City Council. And, you know, unfortunately, when I look at who the campaigners, the activists are that are around, there aren't very many women who look like me. And I can't say that I'm surprised, because it's not an easy space to be in. So, you know, there's a lot of work for us to do, but I think just being in that space is a massive, has a massive impact on people around us.
Thank you, Amna. Yasser, I see you've raised your hand, so I'll go over to you and then we can move to Basit.
Thank you. When it comes to dealing with, you know, the political parties, especially when you have elected ones, of course, I don't preach any miracle solution. I'm just conveying what I've learned from others. There is nothing more effective than a politician who is afraid for his or her seat. Meaning that for the people who are part of the political parties at the local level, etc., they always have to keep a foot on the street. Meaning that at any moment in time, his office or her office can be occupied by their constituency. That they can show up if they are, you know, pushing for a bill that goes against the interests of their constituency. They please don't get this wrong, but they need to smell fear when they come back to their constituency, not a sense of impunity. I get elected on a platform to tackle inequality, and then I start buying, you know, selling them out to the highest bidder and working with the lobbies. That does not work. Many people, unfortunately, don't even know who represents them in parliament, let alone how can they hold them accountable. The problem with our people who get elected is that they have this sense of superiority because that comes out of, you know, impunity. They can do whatever they want and get away with it. That's number one. The number two, of course, is mobilization for election, but this also requires that between two elections, people are actively building coalitions on the street. It's not sufficient to mobilize in times of elections. You also need to be close to people between two elections. You can't ignore people for 5 years and a month before the election, hey guys, come and vote for me. I was once invited by a mosque on the west side of Paris some years ago. And one of the guys who ran for election was like, yeah, but you know, the community doesn't vote. I barely got, you know, 0.5%. And he was holding everybody, you know, responsible for it. And I asked him, look, you know, when did your campaign start? We're like, yeah, well, when it was illegal, you know, period. So basically 2 months before, like, no, around maybe a month and a half. So I was like, you show up out of nowhere a month and a half before the election, people don't know you, and you expect them to vote for you because your name is Muhammad. I mean, you really have to have a low opinion of your voters to think that they're gonna vote for you just based on your first name and your skin color. You are not close to them on a day-to-day basis. You don't speak to them. You have shown no credentials, and you demand that those people vote for you. Oh, come on, man, you gotta be kidding me. The second one, I'm gonna again come to the media. Well, this is something that has to do with racialized communities, and this is across the channel and sometimes maybe across the Atlantic. I'm gonna give you an example. In France, we have been following the Zemmour phenomenon and his racist rhetoric for years. People have complained about him, but people are surprised that the CSA, which is the authority over radio and television in France, seldom acts against Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen and all the Islamophobes in the media. And through the CJL, our organization, I asked our lawyer and etc. She got in touch with a friend of hers working there. And she said, listen, when there was a show targeting homosexuals, in the hour, we received 15,000 complaints. Every time Muslims are attacked, we get 10, 15, 50 complaints. Now, how do you want me to push for action when on the one hand, you've got 15,000 complaints, and on the other, people who don't necessarily feel concerned by Islamophobia only receive 15, 20, or 50 complaints. So it's a question of priority to us. We will go where there is more complaints. So again, there is also a sense of personal responsibility. There is an incompressible part of personal responsibility. If you don't do your share, nobody will do it for you. And then we will be all losing because some people are mobilized, you are not, but then don't complain.
Thank you, Yasser. We're going to move to Basit, but before that, there's a specific question for Basit that's come up from Luke Cooper. Can I ask Basit to say more about how Islamophobia is becoming a more prominent part of far-right rhetoric? This seems to be such an important part of far-right extremism today. You see it across Europe, where freedom of movement is often accepted, but there is huge opposition to non-white Muslim immigration. Also, Trump, Tommy Robinson, anti-Islam seems first for them, anti-immigrant rhetoric comes second. Basit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The thing is, yes, so there's lots of studies now that show that, I think Hope Not Hate also shared something, I don't know if they did the study themselves, that anti-Muslim rhetoric and Islamophobia specifically has replaced immigration as the main driver behind the far right. And I think, people across Europe, you look at a country like Switzerland, not part of the EU, but they still went and banned, burqas, even though it's half a dozen women. They had a whole referendum on that. They banned minarets in France, Hungary, Germany. But what I would argue is that the far right have made it a key cornerstone of their pledge to try and whip up anxieties and fears. But at the same time, I get frustrated when in Holland and in France, what we see as centrist candidates who are seen as liberal, who are seen as not that bad, ate the rhetoric of the far right to win, whether it's Rutte in Holland or Macron in France. I think there was a weird point in the French election last time where Marine Le Pen looked like she was more to the left of Macron when it came to Islamophobia at one point, because he was trying to go harder than her to show, look, I'm the real one who can crack down on Muslims. And so it's definitely like a key driver of the far right. But I think at the same time, we've got to be aware around how the far, I always say, look, for me personally, what's normalized Islamophobia, I've seen Tommy Robinson and the EDL and, all of that up and close on the streets of Luton. But I know, like Yasser was saying before, we know what he is, we know what the enemy looks like. But for me, the real problem, what's helped normalize Islamophobia, is the silence of those people who claim to be on the liberals side or the left side of the progressive. They stay completely silent, and that silence is what helps the right mainstream that view. And just quickly on Laura's question, I think that's a really good question, because at the end of the day, we could have these meetings, but actions speak louder than words. And all we're asking for on the bare minimum is that people speak out against Islamophobia in the spaces you have access to, whether it's Lib Dems, SNP, Labour, whatever. We don't even see people highlighting or speaking out against Islamophobia. I earlier talked about how, the governing party, MPs retweeting Tommy Robinson, Conservative MPs, Bob Blackman invited a Tupman Gorge to Parliament. He praised that man who's now dead, praised the Rohingya genocide. And there's barely a murmur. Why is it that we continue to ignore it? Is it so normalized amongst, I always say Islamophobia is so insidious because it cuts beyond left and right. It's become this kind of universally accepted bigotry that's not only passed the dinner table test, as Syeda said, it's kind of become something that people expect to do if they're, it seems a respectable opinion, and that's what frustrates me.
Thank you, Basit. One of the questions that was asked was specifically about the Poland-Belarus situation. And we've also got another question from Elena Ivanovas asking, saying, I want to bring Brexit back to it, not to rehash old arguments, but because I fear that not speaking about the negative impacts of Brexit on our communities, we are ignoring the fact that it is precisely Muslims, and especially Muslim women, who will be the most vulnerable to both the negative economic and social impacts. Yet people often say immigration was a key driver of Brexit, but they stop short from saying it was actually Islamophobia in particular. And I fear in the migrants' rights spaces, we are again glossing over the pure Islamophobia in how people perceive the others. How do we actually bring this to the center of our campaigns? How do we address people's prejudices without alienating them? Would anyone like to take that question?
So I could try and have a bit of a go. Does anyone else want to? And the only thing I think
it's a British question. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I mean, I think it's really important that we look. The other thing I should say, there was someone asking about public spaces. Just very quickly, for me as a Muslim, I was always taught that hopelessness is a sin in Islam. You know, you cannot become hopeless and think nothing's going to change. That's not what we as Muslims believe. That's not what we're taught to believe, and we've got to keep pushing for change, because otherwise, you know, that goes against the very basics of our faith, to be hopeless and just to think, you know, nothing's going to change. On the point, sorry, that last question was, how do we win people over without alienating them? I think, you know, I've always tried to do that, and I struggle because, you know, I think if they get alienated by me speaking about Islamophobia, that's more on them. I've had this issue and question on the back of my mind where people who are my friends, who, you know, that I classify as close friends, are completely silent when it comes to prejudice and discrimination against Muslims. That really hurts me. But then I think, you know, how do I win these people over? Well, if the, you know, it's really on them. It's really on them. And I hate saying that, but it's the truth. I mean, obviously, I don't believe you should. I think the aim should always be to win people over rather than alienate people. You know, that's how your movement grows. But, you know, they need to also kind of understand that, you know, it's not everyone's job to constantly explain to you, when we've been explaining for the last however many decades, that you need to understand how to tackle these forms of racism. And with Brexit, I mean, Islamophobia was, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, nobody can deny that played a part, certainly from the right-wing Brexiteers like Farage and the others. You know, let's be honest, when we talk about freedom of movement for workers, actually what's interesting is a lot of my Muslim friends who voted leave were saying, well, the European Union is a free movement for who? For white workers mainly. I want, you know, what these guys they're not really interested in black or brown immigration or freedom of movement. That was quite interesting, because that's something that people in the Remain position are oblivious to at times. And I think that's something maybe to bear in mind as well. But I don't know if Amna wants to chip in.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the whole Brexit debate was very much about Islamophobia and how rampant it was throughout that whole campaign. I mean, all of it was horrific. And I remember debating with numerous left members of the party at the time, and you know, many of whom were very much pro-Brexit, Lexit, or whatever the hell they were calling it at the time. And you know, some of their thinking, and I'm like, you know, I'm saying that this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like, this is what Brexit is being framed as. And they were giving me, you know, these kind of pseudo academic reasonings as to why Brexit is a great idea. And I'm like, God, you're really missing the point. You really are missing the point. And I think, yeah, I mean, for me, it was always that, you know, to me, Brexit is Islamophobic. The whole kind of campaign was based around that. And wrongly so, because actually the most that it impacts is like Basit said, it's white workers across Europe, essentially. You know, they're the ones that are being mostly generally kind of impacted by the issues with Brexit. But I think in terms of, you know, how do we address people's prejudices, this is a really hard one. And I work for an organization currently that actually does spend time educating young people about issues like Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, etc. There is a lot of work that goes into that, but that is a very young age group. You're talking about 10 to 15 years old, 15-year-olds. And having worked with children and young people pretty much my whole career, they are really, they are so easy to educate, and for them to be able to pick up the nuances of these issues. They are so on the ball, particularly nowadays, because they have so much access to information. The unfortunate reality is that I find when you have the same conversations with adults is that it completely hits a brick wall often. But I do spend a lot of my time trying to educate, trying to answer questions, trying to challenge things in as polite and diplomatic way as possible. But there are some instances where you really just cannot do that. You really can't, because then you're just disrespecting yourself. I'm sorry, there's points where you just kind of know, I'm sorry, this is beyond the education. This is just me now, you know, trying to say something that is just, I can't deal with this individual because actually they are just Islamophobic. But I do think there is a space for education. And I think, you know, lots of campaigns can focus in on some of the issues and understand what actually Islamophobia is. I mean, I hate Islamophobia, you know, I hate the word Islamophobia. And I know that, you know, one of my local MPs here in Manchester is worked very hard on trying to change that, you know, the reference to anti-Muslim racism, which I find much more powerful than actually what Islamophobia, what does it mean? It doesn't mean very much as a word. And so I think there can be a space for that educating, because that's what you need. I mean, lots of, I've spent a long time kind of really addressing anti-Black racism, particularly within the Arab community, which is so widespread. And that's taken time for me to educate myself, to learn, to ask questions, to respond to things. And I think we all have to make a commitment to actually see this as not something that you just know. You're not just a good person and you know how to deal with these issues, or you understand these issues, that actually you have to work to understand these issues. You have to educate yourself, and you have to respond to the things that you are learning and doing. And so I think it's education with action. I think that's important, and I think that's something we can frame some of the campaigns on.
Thank you so much, Amna. I realize that we are kind of coming to the end of our time now. Thank you to everyone who stayed till this point. There's one last question for Yasser, and then we'll close and sum up. And if anyone does need to leave, do feel free to head off. This question is, why is anti-Islamophobia action causing such division among French leftists? How prominent outside academic circles is the hostility towards even the term Islamophobia?
Well, it's an excellent question because first, the left has framed modern day Islamophobia in France. You have to remember that the first campaigns against the headscarf that go back to 1989 was launched by the left, and that the Council of the State, the highest administrative authority, protected Muslim girls wearing a headscarf. But still, the left, the Socialist Party, for example, the Communist Party, have a historic problem with religion, but more specifically, Islam. Why? Because they were expecting those new French women to stop being Muslims like their parents, that because they are born in France, they would, look for the white savior and not look at adhering to the beliefs of their parents. The second problem is that we have the colonial legacy in France that has always fetishized about taking off the piece of cloth over the heads of Muslim women. And who launched the colonial enterprise out of France? The left. The right was against it for financial reasons, but the left was behind it. And if we take a look today at the way anti-Islamophobia efforts have been carried for the past 15, 20 years, we saw that the left was actually first to oppose these campaigns. Why? Because for the predominant left in France, racism is only a moral question. It's not a political problem. It's only unfortunate these new Nazis, this politician saying something he shouldn't have said, but they don't want to look at it as a structural problem. And this became a huge problem further for them when Muslims decided to stand for themselves. And that's exactly what the government did under Emmanuel Macron, shut down all Muslim organizations dealing with Islamophobia and let the traditional left-wing organizations deal with it so they can frame it. How would they frame Islamophobia today? First, by denying the term Islamophobia, saying there is no such thing, saying that you have the right to be against a religion. No, Islamophobia is again and again attacks against people and institutions. Stop playing dummy. The second thing is that I'll take you back to 2016 when there was a campaign against racism, All United Against Hatred, launched by the government. And they spoke of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And when it came to Islamophobia, they literally made Muslims look like, poor savages that needed a white savior. To them, to the government, Islamophobia was a pig head hanging on top of the mosque's door, and poor Muslims saying, why is this happening to us? or showing, for example, a skinhead beating down an Arab. They will never show you Islamophobia in the form of rampant discrimination, that when you are a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf in France, you stand a 1% chance of getting a job. They didn't show you Islamophobia in terms of discrimination against all Muslims. If you are a Muslim person applying for a job, you are 5 times more likely of facing discrimination. They don't show you Islamophobia in terms of police brutality, police raids, and anti-terrorism, cracking down on Muslim families and ransacking mosques, as we saw it after the November attacks. So that's the problem with the left. And Muslims had no other choice and still have no other choice but to organize by themselves and impose this narrative on whoever is willing to target it. I had to face the so-called radical left, and they were, after the state of emergency, and as Muslim homes were being raided, families destroyed, houses, ransacked by the police, mosques ransacked, terrorized kids, broken families. And I had so-called radical leftists in France telling me, oh, well, the state of emergency has become a problem the day they attacked the climate summit in Paris back in end of 2015. So for 3 weeks, the government was beating down Muslims. It was no problem to them. It only became a problem when their leftist friends got targeted as well. And then after Muslims, they went after environmentalists, after anarchists, union leaders. 2 weeks later, they invite me for a conference. Oh, Yasser, let's speak about what's happening with the state of emergency between, the banlieue, not Muslims, the banlieue and the left. The only thing I said was, join the club. I didn't want to say you deserved it, but if you get quiet when others are being targeted, you're just next. It's only a question of time.
Thank you, Yasser. And with that, we should bring this event to a close. Some really important themes were discussed. The first is the connection to Brexit. And Brexit ultimately was about the politics of fear. And with Islamophobia came the scapegoating of Muslim communities across Britain and the world. This idea that Muslims are a threat, whether they're internal to the nation or external, refugees, migrants at the borders. Now, what we've heard from our speakers today is that the reality of this messaging that came to a head with Brexit, but has been around for decades, even centuries, is that Muslim lives are brutalized. Muslims are excluded from spaces. We suffer from police brutality, state brutality, and the harshness of the media. And what our speakers have really emphasized today is that we actually need the left and the Labour movement as well, and liberals, to step up and now stand in solidarity with us, not only to speak out about Islamophobia, but to take a stand against the violence that we have faced. And this is going to be a long campaign of work to educate about Islamophobia, to raise awareness, which is the first step, but then to mobilize and to create real, meaningful, lasting change. So I hope that all of you will follow us in the campaign. If you're not members of Another Europe, you can join. The link is in the chat, and you can be part of our campaigning decisions. You can come to our conference. And I hope you will follow us on social media and for our future events to take this forward. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much for being here today. Some of you at quite short notice to speak at this really important event about an important issue. The next event that we're having is on the rule of law crisis. That's on Monday at 6:30 p.m., which is very much linked to the rising far-right agenda. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I wish you a very nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.